Madam President, I thank you for convening this very important meeting. We appreciate the briefing by SRSG Otunbayeva and thank her for updating the Council on the recent developments. The views and insights of Ambassador Sosa, USG Tom Fletcher, and the civil society briefer were also extremely helpful. India has historical and civilizational relationship with the people of Afghanistan. As its contiguous neighbor, these historical people-to-people exchanges have forged unbreakable bonds of a special relationship. This is the basis of our contemporary engagement with Afghanistan. Madam President, India is closely monitoring the situation in Afghanistan and has been actively engaged in regional and international efforts to maintain stability and peace in Afghanistan. Our broad approach remains to provide humanitarian and development assistance to the people of Afghanistan and to create an international consensus under the UN framework to resolve various issues between the de facto authorities in Afghanistan and the international community. Our participation in the UN meetings in Doha, in the Moscow format and other fora are a reflection of our efforts to secure peace, stability and development in Afghanistan. India has also joined the two UNAMA working groups on counter-narcotics and enabling private sector in Afghanistan. This Council, through its Resolution 2593 of 2021, had demanded that Afghan territory not be used to threaten or attack any country and had reiterated the importance of combating terrorism in Afghanistan. This continues to guide the international community's approach to combat this menace. The resolution's call on all donors and international humanitarian actors to provide humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan should continue to remain a shared global priority. India has been working with various UN agencies for providing assistance to the Afghan people in areas of health, food security, education, counter-narcotics, sports and capacity building. Since 2001, India has been committed towards rebuilding and reconstruction of Afghanistan. Our development partnership includes more than 500 projects spread across all provinces in Afghanistan. Since August 2021, India has delivered 27 tons of relief material, 50,000 metric tons of wheat, 40,000 liters of pesticides, and more than 300 tons of medicines and medical accessories. India has continued scholarship schemes for Afghan students. Since 2023, it has granted admission to 2,000 Afghan students, including around 600 girls in the online mode. India has also provided winter clothing, stationery items, and toys for primary school students in Kabul. India has partnered with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime in Afghanistan to provide assistance for the welfare of the Afghan drug user population, especially women. Under this partnership, India has since 2022 supplied 11,000 units of hygiene kits, baby food, blankets, clothing, medical aid, and other items to UNODC Kabul. We are also developing the Chabahar port in order to provide connectivity to Afghanistan and to ensure its reconstruction and development. In conclusion, Madam President, let me reaffirm India's steadfast commitment to the friendly people of Afghanistan. India looks forward to continue working closely with all stakeholders and will leave no stone unturned in the global community's efforts towards supporting the Afghan society in their quest for peace, stability, development, and prosperity. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of India for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam President. I congratulate you and the US delegation on your successful presidency of the Council this month. We take note of the Secretary General's latest report on the situation in Afghanistan and the briefing provided by the Special Representative of the Secretary General and the head of UNAMA, Ms. Rosa Otunbayeva. Thank you, ma'am. We commend her leadership and efforts to promote normalization in Afghanistan under very challenging circumstances. We also thank the briefers for their very useful insights. Let me begin by expressing Pakistan's strong condemnation of the cowardly terrorist attack in Kabul yesterday that resulted in the death of Acting Minister for Refugees in the Afghan interim government, Mr. Khalilur Rahman Haqqani, and several others. We offer our heartfelt condolences to the families of the victims, the AIG, and the people of Afghanistan. Madam President, the situation in Afghanistan remains dire and deeply worrying. 23.7 million Afghans are in need of urgent humanitarian assistance. While we are encouraged to see improvements in funding for the Afghanistan Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan, it remains severely underfunded at 37.5% of the required $3.06 billion. This plan must be fully funded without preconditions for the welfare and well-being of the vulnerable Afghan people. Pakistan supports efforts for revival of the Afghan economy and its banking system, addressing liquidity challenges and exploring pathways for unfreezing Afghanistan's national reserves. We are committed to expanding trade relations and commercial linkages with Afghanistan, including through implementation of planned infrastructure and regional connectivity projects such as TAPI, CASA 1000, and Uzbekistan-Afghanistan-Pakistan railway projects. Madam President, Pakistan was the first to advocate sustained engagement with the AIG, and we welcome all such initiatives, including through the ongoing rounds of the Doha process, to help address Afghanistan's problems. However, the effort being undertaken in the framework of the Doha process must go beyond counter-narcotics and the private sector. It must encompass the fundamental issues that have been identified by the international community, especially in the independent assessment submitted by the UN Special Coordinator, Ambassador Feridun Sinirlioglu. Madam President, as noted in the Secretary General's report, Afghanistan continues to face multiple challenges, including terrorism, human rights, political inclusivity, fragile economy, and widespread poverty. These problems are also affecting the region, particularly neighboring countries like Pakistan, that have sustained millions of Afghan refugees for decades and borne the brunt of more recent population flows from Afghanistan. Terrorism within and from Afghanistan poses the single most serious threat to the country, to the region, and to the world. While the AIG is fighting ISIL-K or Daesh, the threat from various other terrorist groups such as Al-Qaeda, the TTP, and others has yet to be addressed. The TTP, with 6,000 fighters, is the largest listed terrorist organization operating in Afghanistan. With safe havens close to our border, it poses a direct and daily threat to Pakistan's security. The TTP is responsible for a number of terrorist attacks in Pakistan, causing the loss of lives of hundreds of innocent Pakistani civilians and law enforcement officials. In countering the TTP's cross-border operations, our security and border officials have confiscated some of the modern weapons acquired by the AIG from stocks left behind by foreign forces. The TTP also receives external support and financing from our adversary. The TTP is fast emerging as an umbrella organization for other terrorist groups in the area, with clear objectives of destabilizing Afghanistan's neighbors. We have evidence of its collaboration with other terrorist groups like the Majid Brigade that is utilizing terrorism to disrupt Pakistan's economic cooperation with China, especially CPEC. Given its long association with Al-Qaeda, the TTP could emerge as Al-Qaeda's arm with a regional and global terrorist agenda. Pakistan will take all necessary national measures to eliminate these threats. We will continue to cooperate with regional and international efforts to effectively root out the menace of terrorism. Madam President, the international community also expects the AIG to fulfill its declared commitments on human rights and political inclusion. Instead of easing earlier restrictions, the AIG has intensified the restrictions on women and girls. These restrictions are contrary to Islamic precepts, jurisprudence, and the Sharia. Madam President, Pakistan shares the desire of most of our neighbors and the international community to enhance the prospects of stability and normalization in Afghanistan and to engage constructively with the AIG. Yet, engagement does not imply international acceptance of policies that contravene international law and Afghanistan's legal and political obligations. An engagement must have clear objectives and purpose. We need a roadmap of the specific and reciprocal actions to be taken by the AIG and the international community to achieve the goal of normalization in Afghanistan. The AIG spokesperson has himself asked for implementation of the Special Coordinator's plan. This is the only viable recipe for economic revival, long-term development, and sustainable peace, security, and development in Afghanistan. The destinies of Pakistan and Afghanistan are intertwined, underpinned by bonds of history, geography, ethnicity, language, faith, and culture. The suffering of our Afghan brothers and sisters affects the Pakistani people deeply. There is no country that is more eager than Pakistan to see Afghanistan return to the international community's fold. Pakistan will continue to play a proactive role to achieve the much-needed and long-awaited peace, stability, and development that the people of Afghanistan rightfully deserve after more than 4 decades of conflict. And we will continue to engage at the bilateral, regional, and international level to realize these aims, including as a non-permanent member of the Security Council for the term 2025-2026. I thank you very much.
Madam President, we thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General and head of the UN Assistance Mission in Afghanistan, Madam Rosa Otunbayeva, for her assessment of the current situation in that country. The Russian Federation consistently supports the activities of UNAMA under your skillful stewardship as you deliver upon the task set upon the mission. We note that Kabul is interested in developing contacts with you. We welcome the United Nations' steadfast commitment to maintaining a presence and to delivery of the necessary assistance to the people of Afghanistan. We are grateful to the report of the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Head of OCHA, Mr. Tom Fletcher, and we listened closely to the statement from the chair of the 1988 Security Council Sanctions Committee, Andres Montalvo Sosa, as well as a statement delivered by the civil society representative, Madam Mahboub. We are pleased with the fact that regional players today have also been going to be provided the floor during this discussion. Madam President, we take note of the Secretary General's report on the situation in Afghanistan. We wish to note the following. For a number of years now, the United Nations Security Council has been discussing the situation in that country. In this time, Afghanistan survived a Taliban rule in the 1990s, a 20-years-long war with the subsequent shameful flight of U.S. and NATO troops, and the return to power of the Taliban movement in August 2021. Amid this turbulence, what has remained unchanged is the following: empty Western promises to build a long-awaited peace and the magnitude of the problems and challenges that Afghanistan continues to have to face alone. The country, which relied on the international community for years, is now in a situation of complete financial paucity. It is subject to unprecedented unilateral sanctions and is a step away from humanitarian and economic catastrophe. And contrary to the bleak forecasts and expectations of our Western colleagues, Afghanistan did not slide into yet another civil war and did not transform into a black hole. The de facto authorities continue to reinforce regional cooperation, and they remain focused on rebuilding socioeconomic capabilities. They are seeking their own path of independent development for Afghanistan without backward glances at Western assistance. At the same time, it is evident that despite the efforts undertaken under present-day conditions, it will be difficult for the country to single-handedly embark on a quick path to development and in one fell swoop to resolve all the protracted problems and to surmount new challenges. The Afghans, more than ever before, need our full support and assistance. The Russian Federation consistently advocated and continues to advocate support for a realistic, comprehensive approach to Afghanistan, at the heart of which is an objective analysis and balanced assessment of the situation. The imperative remains unchanged, namely constructive cooperation of the international community itself on the Afghan issue, first and foremost by fully taking into account the needs of the Afghans themselves and abandonment of narrow parochial agendas, and there's a need for patient, painstaking dialogue with the de facto authorities on a broad range of pressing problems. There was no and is no alternative to that. History has shown time and again that any pressure or blackmail leads to a dead end. We are heartened at the fact that the focus on pragmatic cooperation is something which is embraced by regional players. This is attested to by the outcomes of the quadripartite meeting of the foreign ministers of the Russian Federation, China, Iran, and Pakistan on Afghanistan on the sidelines of the 79th session of the General Assembly, as well as the latest meeting of the Moscow Format held in October. We see that the Taliban themselves, who agreed to join the Doha process in June, continue to remain keen on building such pragmatic cooperation. Yet we regret the obstinate unwillingness of certain Western donors to acknowledge their own errors and to settle their accounts. Instead of seeking real solutions to remedy the situation in Afghanistan, they continue to dictate conditions, insisting that artificial obstacles be erected to resume broad-ranging humanitarian assistance, which is so necessary for ordinary Afghans, including women, girls, and children about whose fates they speak of with such ardor. And yet, when it comes to real assistance for resolving Afghan problems, that is by no means facilitated by the above-mentioned approach. We concur with the Secretary General regarding the complicated domestic political situation in Afghanistan. We are particularly concerned about the ongoing security risks arising from the persistent terrorist activity by the Afghan ISIL wing. We take note of efforts undertaken by the de facto authorities. However, unfortunately, these can hardly be described as sufficient to definitively root out terrorism. We see that the fighters are enhancing their presence in the country, and they are deliberately escalating tensions, recruiting new fighters, including bringing in foreign terrorist fighters, and they continue to carry out new terrorist attacks whose victims include representatives of religious and ethnic minorities, including women and children. The goals remain the same. They are striving to project themselves as an alternative force and to thwart stability in Afghanistan and the region. Furthermore, the terrorists are regularly receiving financial support from abroad, and they are actively using social networks. In light of the quantity of weapons that Western troops left behind in the country, the threat of these weapons falling into the hand of fighters and the further spillover into the region and beyond is increasingly likely. Terrorism is closely entwined with the narcotics issue. We are particularly concerned by the ongoing manufacturing of synthetic narcotics, first and foremost methamphetamine. This is attested to in the assessments in the report of the UNODC. A comprehensive international and regional assistance is more important than ever before, including through the UNODC, to eradicate the narcotics threat, and this includes the cultivation, the production, and circulation of narcotics. This is our shared goal. And what remains significant is of significant importance is the provision of assistance to Afghan partners. We remain closely focused on the socioeconomic situation in the country. We welcome the efforts undertaken by the UN and regional organizations to deliver humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan. The selfless efforts of humanitarian agencies and their personnel is praiseworthy. And under all circumstances, they remain willing to remain on the ground and to help the Afghan people. We note the efforts of the United Nations to expand assistance beyond meeting basic necessities. At the same time, we see that any attempts by UN personnel to make progress in this area are immediately blocked by a number of Western donors who categorically refuse any hint of an idea to provide assistance in rebuilding schools and hospitals and to rebuild the necessary roads, as well as to build the capability of independent and self-reliant state. As a result, under various pretexts, the UN humanitarian plan on Afghanistan remains underfunded. The activity of a number of humanitarian organizations and agencies has deliberately been curtailed, and proposals for the participation of UNAMA in discussion of issues of lifting Afghan asset freezes are rejected out of hand. Colleagues, how is it that assistance to women, girls, children, religious and ethnic minorities in other countries on the Council's agenda are more important than assistance to Afghan women and men and children? The Russian Federation has systematically been providing targeted assistance to those in need in Afghanistan, including through multilateral humanitarian organizations, and we shall continue to work proactively to that end. We are also continuing to closely monitor developments as regards respect for the rights and freedoms of all Afghan people, including women and girls, including taking into account the recently introduced bans. Other imperatives includes the establishment of a genuinely inclusive government with the participation of all of the country's ethno-political groups, and we trust that we will see progress in both of these areas. Madam President, the Russian Federation fully supports the right and desire of the Afghan people to live in a peaceful, prosperous country free of terrorism and narcotics. Therein lies the key to order and stability in the region. However, building this long-term, sustained peace is impossible without painstaking dialogue with the de facto authorities, which does not include imposing one's own views and priorities on them. This will determine a prompt end to the current deadlock and will help to ensure that Afghanistan achieve international reintegration. Thank you.
1,183 days. It's emblazoned on all of our minds today. Colleagues, just 2 days ago, we marked the 76th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Ironically, Afghanistan was one of the 48 original countries that adopted the Declaration, which applies all rights and freedoms equally to men and women. But today, the Taliban is issuing archaic edict after edict after edict, designed to deprive women and girls of fundamental rights, of the chance to learn and live and thrive with freedom and dignity. Most recently, the Taliban banned women's access to medical training, which means no access to medical care. How will women's health care needs be met in the future if there are no qualified women doctors, nurses, dentists, and midwives, and male doctors are not allowed to treat women? This new restriction defies logic and could represent a death sentence for Afghan women and girls in dire need of potentially life-saving medical treatment. It will have an impact on every mother, every unborn infant, boys and girls, and on the future of Afghanistan. This is not cultural, and it's not religious. It is unfathomable. It's sick. It is heartless. It means these men, Taliban, are sentencing their mothers who birthed them, their sisters, their wives, their own daughters to die before their eyes if they become ill. This month also marks 2 years since the Taliban banned women from attending universities and from working for non-governmental organizations. The Taliban are determined to erase women from public life, to try and erase their futures. Peaceful reconstruction is what we heard from our Chinese colleagues. That is not what we're seeing here. But in the face of the Taliban's neglect and repression, the people of Afghanistan may remain resilient and will not be blinded by the Taliban's failures and injustices. My message to the Afghan people and to Afghan women in particular is this: we stand with you in solidarity. In the face of this repression, we and our partners remain steadfast in our firm commitment to support the Afghan people. Colleagues, we're also deeply concerned by the dire humanitarian situation in Afghanistan, with nearly 23 million Afghans, more than half of Afghanistan's population, in need of humanitarian assistance as a result of food insecurity, malnutrition, widespread displacement, and contamination from explosive ordnance. The Taliban's indefensible restrictions hinder humanitarian access to vulnerable populations and exacerbate the stark humanitarian needs we're seeing now, particularly when it comes to women's health throughout the country. The United States and our humanitarian partners will continue to deliver critical aid to Afghans in need, and we will continue to press the Taliban to change course. We have engaged the Taliban bilaterally, as well as through UN-convened meetings, to try to find ways to support the Afghan people. But as the divide between us on political and human rights matters grow larger, it is difficult to see how we justify continued engagement, even on technical matters. Any engagement must be linked with a broader dialogue on human rights and a political roadmap, as envisioned in UN Security Council Resolution 2721. Colleagues, it's been a year since this Council adopted this resolution, in which we also requested the Secretary General appoint a special envoy to develop this roadmap to reintegrate Afghanistan into the international community. The United States expects the UN-led donor process to support this roadmap and promote the Taliban's adherence to the international community's expectations, but also, more importantly, to the Afghan people's expectations. And while we certainly recognize and appreciate the work UNAMA is doing, UNAMA should not be a substitute for an independent and senior figure to spearhead this process, as set out very clearly in last year's UN independent assessment. We also appreciate the UN efforts that went into the first counter-narcotics working group meeting as part of the Doha process. But I want to reiterate our call that Afghan experts, particularly women, must be meaningfully included throughout the Doha process and its working groups. We cannot allow the Taliban to dictate the terms of these meetings or to exclude Afghan experts. Before I close, I would like to again speak directly to the women of Afghanistan. The Taliban may try to silence your voices and make you invisible, but we see you and we hear you. We know you are the linchpin to a stable, peaceful, prosperous Afghanistan, and we will endeavor to match your resolve by developing creative solutions and concrete initiatives that will provide opportunities for education and employment. While we use all the tools at this Council's disposal to push the Taliban to rescind this discriminatory decrees. Thank you. I now give the floor to Ms. Roya Mahboub.
Thank you, Madam President. Respected member of Security Council, today marks 1,183 days since girls were banned from attending secondary schools. Having witnessed both Afghanistan's darkest hours and its glimpse of hope, I stand before you as an advocate fighting against of my country's descent into gender apartheid. My story begins in 1996. I witnessed how the Taliban came to our homes, collecting all our books and even our small TV, setting them on the fire in the open field near our house. From my window, I watched as the knowledge and freedom were reduced to ash. This marked the beginning of the 5 years of darkness for me and my family. My country was trapped in an oppressive regime that denied us education, silenced women, and immiserated us. Not again. After Taliban's fall in 2001, women gained rights to education, work, and contributed beyond the home to society. They became doctors, engineers, policymakers, and entrepreneurs. I was one of them, studying computer science, launching a business, and leading a robotic team that built ventilator and UV disinfection system during the pandemic. 63% of our population are under the age of 25, yet today 1.4 million girls are out of the school. I am reminded of darkest days of my childhood. My key message is this: Afghanistan is not at peace with itself. The Taliban regime is waging a civil war against of the women that is undermining national, regional, and global security. But this is not just about women. This is about suicidal impact at the home and abroad. It is not just about secondary education. Last week, they banned us from training the nurses and midwives, who will help with birth and care for future daughters and sons of Afghanistan. Men are not allowed to treat female patients or teach girls. Consider this, what this means for this generation and the next, and the component effect. Our daughters grew up without role models, without dreams and hope. The Taliban are condemning Afghanistan to misery again. Our country is suffering from the climate crisis, from drought to earthquake, from an economy governed by a group of men obsessing over whether women should be allowed to go to the park or have a beauty salon, rather than care how to resolve the hunger and homelessness of our people. UNDP estimated that restriction on women's livelihood have cost Afghanistan up to $1 billion just last year, at a time when 85% of Afghans live on less than $1 a day. Almost half of employed women lost their jobs because of the Taliban. The result is that many women are now forced to beg, but the Taliban banned that too, throwing women into their jail where they raped and abused. Economic hardship and a school ban have driven to 25% rise in child marriage, while mental morality risks have jumped 50%. As domestic violence worsens, nearly all girls and women suffer from depression, anxiety, and isolation. Their household decision-making power shrinks yearly, and suicide attempts and deaths continue climbing. This is neither Islamic nor about protecting women. This is about systematic oppression of Afghan women and girls, about gender segregation, about preventing our full development, about causing us bodily and mental harm, and about denying us our basic human rights and freedom. This is gender apartheid. By removing women from workforce and education, the Taliban are deliberately crippling Afghanistan economy. This is itself a security risk, as disparate communities become more vulnerable to exploitation by criminal networks and extremist groups that operated across borders. So I repeat it, they are not only harming women, they are also creating an environment where children and youth are at the risk of radicalization. The Taliban focuses in decorating children in madrasa and encouraging girls to become good models for jihadists. What will this do to how a man grew up and their views on the woman? The economic crisis and political thinking is exploded by extremist groups that the Taliban either fight, protected, or tolerated. Al-Qaeda affiliated, TTP, and ICC recruited disillusioned youths, often from marginalized communities. Extremist poverty and ideology are mixing. Education is the answer. At the age of 14, I first learned about computer and the internet, and it sparked my journey to become a tech entrepreneur, first addressing the local needs, then expanding internationally. I then started Digital Citizen Fund. For a decade, we established technology and STEM innovation centers, teaching thousands of the girls learning about coding, financial literacy, and science. Then I started Afghan Girls Robotic Team, where the girls aged of 12 to 18 learn robotic and compete internationally. Their success transformed their community's perception of the women's capabilities. Our graduates launched over hundreds of businesses, and it would be thousands if it weren't for the Taliban. With internet access now reaching every province, the Digital Citizen Fund adopted to delivering online education while supporting home schooling and safe in-person learning. Our graduates have become engineers, scientists, and entrepreneurs, winning international scholarship and competition. We dreamed of transforming Afghanistan into a hub of tech innovation, a nation defined by progress and potential rather than terror and war. Our youth dream with the talent and determination, envisioning a future where they can contribute to rebuilding their homeland. Despite all adversity, our hope for brighter future stays alive. Despite all this, DCF is trying to best to serve our people, but the demand is far greater than what we can currently support. The Taliban's harsh policies have led to arrest of some of our local partners who dare to continue providing education to the girls. This is what our educators and students face every day. Regardless, we push forward. Education is not just about the knowledge. It's a lifetime for future of Afghanistan. Think about that. The component effect of these bonds over this and coming generation. Likewise, I urge you to consider the message you send when you meet with the Taliban in Doha, way that women and civil society present. You enable them. You enable gender apartheid. Women's rights are not just about women. They are about human rights and understanding how without them there can be neither peace nor security. Excluding half of the population from governance, education, healthcare, and the economy undermine all stabilities. The Taliban policy created systematic vulnerabilities, making the entire region fragile, while dismantling the decade of institutional knowledge and capacity, worsening our own fragility. This governing vacuum, this narrowing of view and idea to the problem of Afghanistan face created deliberately divided and economically corrupted country. This is why I say that the current regime is waging civil war against women, constantly restricting their rules and rights instead of addressing the real issue facing Afghans. I call on the international community to formalize and recognize gender apartheid as a crime under international law, with a duty on the states to suppress gender apartheid. The member of this Council and United Nations General Assembly should further support the creation of the special tribunal to investigate the Taliban's crime and provide justice for victims of gender-based violence and human rights abuse. As it's important to have an engagement with the Taliban, but I think that also it's important that Taliban engagement be conditional on concrete progress on women's rights, including meaningful, not tokenized participation of the Afghan women and civil society in policy reform. We require more than private meeting and limited or tokenized representation to address our exclusion. The UN needs to develop strategies for women participation across all forums. Support education initiative and invest in women's lead initiative, invest in underground and remote education, provide international scholarships, e-learning platform, and women-led businesses, providing flexible and predictable funding to sustain grassroots effort which is critical to Afghan women's education and livelihoods. If you care about the impact on our mental health, do your part to change the environment we suffer in. Respected members of the Security Council, we Afghan women are not just a victim. We remain leaders and contributors. But this isn't our battle alone. The world united against racial apartheid. Today, I ask you to stand with Afghan women and girls and united against gender apartheid. Thank you.
I thank Ms. Mahboob for her brief